2 months ago, a book was published entitled What We Owe the Future, by William MacAskill, a professor of philosophy at Oxford University. Since then, Professor MacAskill has been making the rounds promoting his book, and he calls his philosophy efficient altruism. And the concept that he emphasizes, he calls long-termism, which he defines as, quote, the view that positively influencing the long-term future is a key moral priority of our time. That an Oxford philosophy professor felt the need to coin the term long-termism troubles me. In AJ's prayer for our world and our government, we include the line, may our leaders forsake immediate gratification to pursue long-term weal. That line is important to say every week because it's intended to serve as a counterbalance to the brevity of the news cycles, the election cycles, and less obviously to some, the financial statements of corporate earnings. Those cycles turn over very quickly, and they focus our attention on the immediate past and the near future. And by focusing our attention on such a short time span, it works against our long-term views and interests. So I suppose that explains the need for the word long-termism, which in a previous era would have just been called wisdom. But alas, wisdom is out of fashion. So here's the fundamental precept of long-termism, quoting, future people matter morally just as much as people alive today. There may well be more people alive in the future than there are in the present or have been in the past, and we can positively affect future people's lives. How low have we sunk that we need a new philosophical movement focused on the moral worth of future people? How tricky is it to arrive at the conclusion that if I have worth, and if my children have worth, then God willing, soon and in our days, my future grandchildren will have worth? Let me explicitly state the alternative so you can hear how absurd it is. The alternative would be that I have more worth than my children and significantly more worth than my grandchildren, and generations beyond my own grandchildren would barely register as a blip on my moral horizon. Although there may be some people for whom that's true, that ideology is twisted. Professor MacAskill's insight is that future people have worth and that there is a moral imperative to positively affect future people's lives. How can something so obvious qualify as a book-worthy insight from a tenured philosophy professor at Oxford University? I would like to think that most 10-year-olds would agree that people in the future have rights and matter morally just as much as we do. Halavai, if the kids were Jewishly literate, they might even say that every human is created in the divine image, and it doesn't matter when they were created. What these Jewish kids will eventually learn, God willing, is that the Torah insisted, unlike the Babylonian and Egyptian neighbors, that it wasn't just the kings who were the image of the divine. The Torah's radical claim, radical then and radical now, was that every single person, regardless of their pedigree, their socioeconomic status, or even their immigration status. Every single person was and is created in God's image. Once we introduce the Torah into the conversation, it's important to know what the ultimate goal of the Torah is. Because if you're not on board with the ultimate goal, then any particular claim that the Torah makes may or may not be relevant. So you can sum up the entire narrative of the Hebrew Bible with one sentence. Here it is. The goal of the Hebrew Bible's narrative is to get the Israelites to the land of Israel and keep them there. That's it. You can say it on one foot. The goal of the Hebrew Bible's narrative is to get the Israelites to Israel and keep them there. A more biblical formulation of the goal is to create a society that can live long on the land that the Lord your God is giving you. Hillel is the sage who summarized all of Judaism while standing on one foot, which was a pun because he also stood the whole Torah on one leg. He said, don't do to others what you find hateful. That's what the Torah teaches. Why the Torah teaches that is so that we can live long on the land. Here are a few other examples. Honor your father and mother so that you may live long on the land. Have honest weights and measures so that you may live long on the land. Guard all God's statutes and commandments in order that you and your children live long on the land that Adonai your God is giving you for all time. It's easy to lose focus on the big picture when you're concentrating on the details. And when Jews come to shul on Shabbat and read the Torah portion, we're focused on the details. But the big picture is about living long on the land. And for just about all of us, if the Torah is going to be at all relevant, we need to reframe the Torah's focus on the land of Israel to the land where we live. Another radical difference between the religion and politics of our Torah and that of ancient Israel's neighbors was that we weren't looking to the afterlife for our rewards. The religion and politics of the Torah were, and still are, this worldly, so that observing the Torah's laws of justice will result in a life of equity and security. We repay kindness with kindness and reap what we sow. There's a short psalm, Psalm 128, that builds to a crescendo with a heartwarming description of our greatest reward. It's written for men, as is much of the Torah, but I hope we can all take the gender out of the psalm. Shir HaMa'alot, a song of ascents or steps. Happy are all who revere the Lord, who follow God's ways. You shall enjoy the fruit of your labors. You shall be happy and you shall prosper. Your wife shall be like a fruitful vine within your home. Your children like olive saplings around your table. So shall the man who reveres the Lord be blessed. May the Lord bless you from Zion. May you share the prosperity of Jerusalem all the days of your life and live to see your children's children. May all be well with Israel. The founder of modern Orthodoxy, 19th century Germany, was named Samson Raphael Hirsch. He wrote a commentary on the book of Psalms, and this is what he says about that psalm. If the spirit and the attitude which the Father endeavored to cultivate in his children are transmitted to his grandchildren before his own eyes, if in this manner he is certain that even before his own death, that he himself is immortal, and he will live long after his departure from earth, then he has truly attained the pinnacle of earthly happiness. In the Hebrew Bible, the greatest reward is living to see your grandchildren carrying on your values. That is the song of ascents. Watching your grandchildren sing the blessings for grape juice and motzi at the Shabbos table is a slice of heaven. Barbara Schatz and Sheva Cohen are our angels who co-chair the Slice of Heaven Committee, otherwise known as the Grandparents Group. I'm guessing that neither of you has studied philosophy with Professor McCaskill of Oxford University, and yet each of you knew that future people matter morally just as much as people alive today. As an aside, the rabbis are very clear that those future people might not be your biological descendants, but the heirs of your legacy. When the Torah says in the V'ahavta v'shinantam levanecha, you shall teach them diligently to your children, the rabbis say that the Torah is not necessarily speaking about your biological children. It's talking about your students. Children are a natural vehicle through which our values live on, but there are lots of amazing people right here in our congregation who bequeath their legacies beyond their genetics. Okay, back to our song. Shir HaMa'alot means a song of steps, in part because the first Jewish choir, right, you guys are in a long line of Jewish choirs, the first Jewish choir, the Levitical choir, stood on the steps leading up to the Jerusalem temple. But our psalm is also one of sequential steps to the summit. A life of devotion to God's ways results in meaningful work that is sustaining, a spouse with whom you entwine and procreate, and a family who gathers around the table for nourishment, both physical and spiritual. Those rewards follow from walking in God's ways, and they also lead to the long-term prosperity of the city of Jerusalem, so that you will be blessed to see your grandchildren. That's the promise of Olam Haba, the world to come, which is this world that is coming in the future. That is the song of ascents. But after all the books of the Hebrew Bible had been written, life got messy, or messier. Our leaders thought that we were doing all the right things, but we weren't seeing the benefits, just the opposite. It felt like we were being punished, especially after the destruction of the temple by the Romans in 70. The Torah says we reap what we sow, but did we really sow such toxic seed to reap destruction and exile? Most of the rabbis said, yes, sirree, Bob, we sure did. In the language of our prayer book, on page 299 in AJ's Machzor, Mipnei chatotenu galinu me'artzenu. We were exiled from our land because of our sins. When ultra-Orthodox rabbis use the same logic and blame the Shoah on people like us, their logic comes from the Torah and the rabbis. There were other rabbis who couldn't believe that our sins were worthy of exile, so they searched for another explanation. They reasoned that the rewards for doing the right things are not given in this world, but in the next world after we die. Different sages recorded many different ideas. There was no systematic theology or dogma that you had to buy into, and there's still not. In Pirkei Avot, Rabbi Yaakov says that this world is like a hallway, a prose door, to the banquet room. Where are all the goodies? The goodies are in the banquet room, not in the hallway. So if we behave in the hallway in this world, we get to enter the banquet room, the world to come. That's from Pirkei Avot, which is in the Mishnah, the oldest layer of exclusively Jewish literature from the rabbis, which also says that kids should start learning Mishnah at age 10. So Jewish kids and the Jewish adults they grew up to be started thinking that we need to behave in the hallway in this world for the purpose of getting to the goodies in the banquet hall, the world after we die. That theology served its purpose during our many years of scattered exile. It may have been that some rabbis who mouthed that theology didn't believe it was true, but understood that it was the best theology to keep the Jewish people unified through the performance of commandments, the mitzvot, when they didn't have a common language or a common land. Because if we were exiled for our sins, we could be returned from our mitzvot. But today, that sort of reward and punishment theology is off-putting for several reasons. All of most American Jews don't believe it. Bet, earning heavenly rewards is sometimes associated with Muslim terrorists who blow Jews up. And Gimel, that sort of theology trains your vision on the afterlife, where the goodies are. Thank God our sages never allowed that other world theology to determine what our deeds should be in this world. Rabbinic Judaism, the Judaism of the rabbis after the destruction of the temple, added an otherworldly dimension to the biblical worldview, but Judaism never replaced the centrality of this worldly commandments. Other religions did. The Mishnah is filled with laws found nowhere in the Torah about how to run a just society. Family law, zoning regulations, business law, criminal procedure, not to mention things that we associate with religion, like blessings and prayers and holidays. The Mishnah and its next literary level, the Talmud, also combine these topics. For example, if someone steals a sukkah, can they fulfill their obligation to dwell in that sukkah on Sukkot? Or how about this? A man divorces his wife by sending her a writ of divorce, a get, through a messenger. The husband then says, "I cancel the get," before the messenger delivers it to his wife. As we just experienced in Kol Nidre, words are legal instruments that create new realities. The wife who then receives the get has no way of knowing that the kosher-looking get has been orally invalidated by her no-good-nick husband. So she marries her high school flame who's been waiting in the wings. Is she an adulteress? Is he an adulterer? Are their kids mumsers? Every question the Talmud raises and every answer is ultimately trying to determine how we live long in the land that the Lord our God is giving us. I now want to show you how seriously our tradition takes long-termism in relationship to our food supply. There's a growing community of scholars who sees an ecological rationale for some of the laws of keeping kosher. Land animals, according to the Torah, must have two characteristics to be edible. First, they need to have cloven hooves. And second, they have to chew their cud. If those are the only land animals that we can eat, then those will be the only land animals we raise. Why raise animals that you can't consume? Animals with cloven hooves can graze on the Judean hillsides without toppling over. Those cloven hooves help the animals dig in. That means they can graze on vegetation that would be inaccessible to other sorts of animals. Animals that chew their cud are the most efficient at absorbing nutrients from what they eat because the food goes through their digestive processes more than once. You put those two things together and you understand that the Torah allows only livestock that is the most efficient in its use of vegetation, both geographically and physiologically. Pretty darn clever. The Mishnah takes things one step further and prohibits raising goats and sheep in the land of Israel. Why? Goats and sheep are kosher animals, but they eat too much farmed food that was needed to feed people. Goat and sheep meat is still kosher, and you can still eat the meat in Israel if it's imported. But you can't raise sheep or cattle in the land of Israel. The rabbis saw a problem involving the just distribution of food and solved it by prohibiting what had been legal but had an unintended destructive side effect. Feeding the poor was a higher priority than allowing the wealthy to have lamb chops. The priority of feeding the poor is not new. We will see it in tomorrow's Haftarah, tomorrow, where Isaiah screams to share your food with the hungry. That's the fast God chooses. Sometimes, in order to feed the hungry, you need to change your own diet. That's what our rabbis did. That legal philosophy, far wiser than originalism, is central to our inheritance, to our legacy. As I have mentioned before, Judaism sees nothing intrinsically wrong with eating animals or with killing animals for human benefit. But the factory farming of cattle has had an unintended destructive side effect. It emits a staggering amount of methane, which is a particularly potent greenhouse gas. Ignoring the long-term implications has been toxic to our environment. At what point do rabbis and other leaders with far greater power stand up and say, supporting the factory farming of cattle by consuming factory farmed meat is a clear and present danger to the long-term health of the planet and its residents. Therefore, consuming factory farmed beef is no longer permitted. What McCaskill calls long-termism, I call wisdom. If we want to save our planet for our grandchildren and theirs, we need to act more wisely. And that will involve changing not only our diets, but our consumption patterns in general. We shouldn't be using Air Force One to vote in primary elections when we could just as easily use an absentee ballot. We can't do or have everything we might want without there being long-term catastrophic consequences. The most famous Talmudic story about the temple's destruction attributes the calamity to the meekness of the rabbis who were committed to doing things just the way they had always been done before. According to the Talmud, it was rabbinic meekness that destroyed the temple and led to the exile of the Jewish people for nearly 1,900 years. That story is also central to our inheritance, to our legacy. If we are to live long on the land that the Lord our God has given us, we need to make tshuva. We need to change direction and get on the right path right now. There is no time to be meek. We cannot continue blithely eating our lamb chops, oblivious to those whose lands are being submerged by rising waters and once in a millennium floods, or scorched from fire and drought. The Israel Meteorological Service warned in 2020 of a significant warming trend in all regions of the country, where each heat wave, which kills on average 45 Israelis, will be increasing from 4 a year to 6 a year. Also in 2020, the Israeli Ministry of Environmental Protection noted that climate change is expected to reduce rainfall, decreasing the flow of the Jordan River by 22%, and imperiling the availability of fresh water for the region. Simultaneously, rising sea levels along the Mediterranean basin will ultimately affect all of Israel's coasts from Rosh Hanikra to the border of the Gaza Strip, potentially leading to saltwater infiltration of aquifer groundwater. Israel, with a long coast and a big desert, is taking climate change very seriously. We need our politicians and governments to take this issue as the life and death threat that it is, if not for us, then for our grandchildren and their future. If not for us in Philadelphia, then for others on the front lines. Safety is our ultimate value. Some people think the Torah and Jewish tradition are antiquated and irrelevant today. Our tradition has never been more relevant. The ability to live long on the land has never been more in jeopardy. You know why the psalmist compared our grandchildren to olive saplings? When well watered, an olive tree lives to be over 100 years old and continues producing olives its whole life. Its most productive period is between the ages of 50 and 65. There are a few of us today who would love our most productive yield to be between the ages of 50 and 65. The psalmist, the Torah, our tradition, they all offer invaluable wisdom to help guide us to live long on the land if we are not too meek to hear and to heed God's wisdom. May you live to see your children's children like olive saplings around your table, and may all be well with Israel. Gemar Chatima Tova.